안녕하세요. Please forgive my probably only word of Korean. It's really nice to talk to you. My name's Nigel Baines, and I'm the author and illustrator of Mum Don't Sink. And the book is a graphic novel about the 2 years I had looking after my mum when she had dementia. It's also a little bit of a book about what it was like growing up in England. And it was a book I did as a final project on my master's in 2017. But when I look back on it now, I realise it was a story that sort of found me rather than me finding the story. But I hope to tell you a little bit more about it. So it's really exciting to be published in Korea. I'm an illustrator as well and a designer, so I've illustrated a few books that have been published and around the world, and I've got a book on my shelf that was published in Korea. But for something that's all my own work to be taken on in Korea and in a different culture and a different arena really does mean quite a lot. One question I got asked was, is there a special part of the book that meant a lot or was especially good to draw or to illustrate or spend a lot of time on? And it's a small thing. It's a piece in the book where my father and I had a small conversation. And the conversation is a tiny, tiny thing. It was a few words in a car late at night on a rainy motorway in England, coming back from a football match. And my dad didn't express feelings at all, but he said something, and underneath what he said was this whole river of meaning. And ever since that happened, I've talked to friends about it. It's stuck with me, and it's something I'd always wanted to express in some way, and I got my chance in the book to do that as a spread in the book, and that really did mean a lot. I didn't have books at all growing up. I loved comics, really loved sort of comics where you have funny words and pictures together, they're easy to read, and that whole thing grew and grew and grew for me. But I think from an early age, I was one of these children that used to try and imagine what infinity was like, or I would look at objects like a chair and think, oh, what is a chair? And what makes a chair a chair? So I was always observing, always looking, and that has always led me on to an interest in what it is to be human and the human condition, the good and the bad, and this short time we have. So that sort of leads on very well into talking about things in graphic novels, about the way we are. I've been asked as well if I was hesitant or worried about writing my own story, and I have to say no, not really. Even though I was quite a quiet boy, I was always a bit of a performer when I was younger, and I did at one point did quite a bit of stand-up comedy. So when you've stood on a stage in front of a lot of people who are not laughing and you're trying to make them laugh, and you're really exposing yourself, so that doesn't worry me at all. Once you've done that, you can pretty much do anything, really. I got the title Afloat because when Mum was had her dementia, or Alzheimer's, I was reading a book which was the true story of a sailor in Central America who was lost at sea for 438 days with no food or water. It's an astonishing story. And it gave me nightmares because obviously it reflected what I felt I was going through and what Mum was obviously going through. I kept doodling pictures of me, or a character called me, lying on a boat in the middle of this vast ocean. And I think that's just naturally where the idea of afloat came from, being adrift in the ocean. And the Korean title I really love, Mum Don't Sink. It feels more poetic somehow. And I look back now and I probably wished I could change that, my version. But yeah, that's how I got there. I was asked what sort of readers in Korea might be interested in this book, and I suppose a whole range. Firstly, anyone who is struggling with a parent or a relative or maybe a friend who has a condition like dementia or Alzheimer's. Our culture here is very different. The way we do a lot of things is very different from Korea, but humanity is the same all the way through, all the way around the world, and the things we share, pain, loss, grief, happiness, joy, they're so universal. So anyone who's interested in any aspect of the human condition or how we cope and deal with loss and grief and change, I think anyone who's thinking about those things will enjoy it. And maybe also anyone who's interested in just seeing what it was like growing up in England in the 1970s. I do have a book coming out in January 2023 with the publisher Hachette, and it's a children's graphic novel and quite a large one. And that is a story loosely themed around loss, but with quite a lot of adventure in there. In terms of sort of adult themed books as well, I'm looking at things like depression or these senses of isolation and loss. The world as it is now is quite crazy, and while we have more reasons to be so connected digitally with each other, I think people have never felt more isolated or unsure, and those are things I'd really like to have a look at in a graphic novel. And some final words just for you Korean readers. I've been very fortunate to have travelled a lot, and South Korea was somewhere I visited a few years ago, and I really loved it. I loved Seoul, I loved Jirishan National Park, and some of the islands around, I think it was Mokpo. And the thing that struck me most was the warmth and friendliness of people, which I've experienced again in publishing the book with the people I've worked with. And that would be my main message, that even though growing up in England in the 1970s was, I should imagine, very different from growing up in Korea at that time, we share so many things all across the world. We have a chaotic world at the moment with so many terrible, terrible things going on. But travel has taught me that people are the same pretty much. They have the same fears, same aspirations, and experience the same joy and hope. So in that sense, we on this small planet really are all together, and it's a great joy for me to share this book with you.